Hi, I'm Randy Kaiser, Jasper County Sheriff. I want to share with you a specific incident that I came across about 15 years ago. When I was working on the Drug Task Force, investigating a large group, a conspiracy of narcotics distribution here in southwest Missouri, I came across a young lady in her late teens or early 20s. She was a little bit low functioning, and I later found out that she was delinquent when she was a juvenile and involved in criminal activity her entire adult life. I found out that as part of this organization, she was essentially forced to fly out to California, have dope strapped onto her body, and then fly back to Missouri. You know, in the later years, as I came to receive training in human trafficking, I realized that I wish that I had investigated this in a little bit different way, that I'd looked at this in a little bit different manner. Then I was looking at this as strictly a criminal enterprise, that she was just involved voluntarily in criminal activity. I didn't really think of it in any other way other than that. And like I said, after I received the training, I kind of started to look at it in a little bit different light, and kind of made me regret that I didn't have that training before. So that's another reason why I would encourage everyone to receive this training and receive the information about things that they need to be looking for, so that they have an idea when those signs come up, when those signals come up, that they know they can perhaps take a different direction in the course of their investigation. You know, when I started my career 20 years ago, if somebody had came to me and said, "We want you to participate in some training on human trafficking," I would have said, well, maybe for the border towns or maybe for the bigger cities, but I work in southwest Missouri, so there's really no need for me to have that kind of training. I've since found out that that's actually not the case. In my years on the Drug Task Force specifically, I have come across some situations that after having received that training, I realize now that I had observed some of the signs of human trafficking that I had not previously recognized before. My focus was on making the arrest, finding the contraband, catching the bad guy. When I saw a young lady in her late teens or early 20s that didn't have her ID card because the person that she was with had it, or had her cash or her car keys or her motel room keys, none of that really rang a bell with me at the time. And now that I've received training in human trafficking, I realize that those are some of the indicators that I should have been on the lookout for. I should have asked some, perhaps some different questions to find out what was going on in that situation. So I would encourage everyone to, no matter where you're at, rural communities, smaller areas, even in Missouri, there's this kind of thing that we should be on the lookout for. If we're going to be efficient and effective law enforcement officers, we need to be open to accepting the idea that this is going on here, train ourselves to recognize it, and then be diligent about looking for it.
Hello, I'm Paul Fenelwalt from the Missouri Center for Education Safety. Today we're visiting with Emily Russell from the Missouri Sheriff's Association and Christine McDonald, a victim of human trafficking. Emily, what do people think about when they hear the word human trafficking?
You know, they think about some guy carting a dozen kidnapped girls around in a van across the country, forcing them to prostitute themselves. And they also think that it's something that is not happening here. But in reality, it is, right here in Missouri. From our biggest cities to our smallest rural communities, we see parents selling children for sex, boyfriends selling girlfriends for sex, and we even see many forced labor situations.
Emily, in your experience, are there people already working in the field closely with victims of human trafficking who may be missing the warning signs or not asking the right questions to pick up on the fact that the person that they're working with is a victim of trafficking?
Unfortunately, yes.
Why is that?
Well, you know, human trafficking is like a disease in that it presents itself through various symptoms, if you will. For example, you have law enforcement, prosecutors, and advocacy centers dealing with drug-related cases, sexual and domestic violence cases, and even missing persons cases on a daily basis. Many times human trafficking cases look like those at first, But what we're seeing is that after these professionals have received human trafficking specific training, these victims are finally starting to be found when we look beyond the initial symptoms and open our eyes to the possibility of a bigger picture, a more complex crime. You've also got teachers and folks in children's division, juvenile justice even, that have kids in their presence exhibiting self-injurious behaviors like cutting, engaging in risky behavior like stealing or experimenting with drugs and alcohol, running away from home. These are some of the indicators a victim of human trafficking will present. If we don't understand the crime of human trafficking, we'll take these single instances that we see and focus on a quick fix for them, like detention for a delinquent youth, jail time for somebody that we've labeled as a homeless addict, or deportation for an illegal immigrant, and never get to the root of what's triggering their activities, the criminals behind the scenes who have forced these victims into slavery.
Christine, were there people in your life that missed the red flags or the warning signs that you were the victim of human trafficking?
It's a very good question. You know, as a youth, I ran away a multitude of times. I was a cutter. I was into self-mutilating. And, you know, I was looked at as a child with emotional issues. Nobody asked the right questions. As a runaway, I ran away a multitude of times. Nobody tried to address the purpose and why I was running away. Instead, I was just a delinquent. No teenager, no youth wants to be homeless out on the streets or in and out of group homes and institutions or hungry out on the streets. When I was in school, I never had any friends. I was very isolated. I would always stand by myself or sit under trees by myself, very secluded from the rest of the kids in school or my peers. I don't know if there was anything specific they would have noticed, but there were symptoms there that were a much bigger picture. The deeper issue, I think, for me would have been, would I have said anything? The problem is we're trained up in a way that are the persons that victimize these individuals, and for myself specifically, is, you know, we don't talk about it. Would anybody have been able to ask me different questions and my responses been able to open up and say what was really going on? I can't say that. After I became an adult, law enforcement, as I was punitively charged with things such as being a vagrant because I was homeless, prostitute because I was being trafficked by a pimp, an addict, and the law enforcement never, even if they would arrest me with my pimp sitting right beside me, nobody asked the right questions. Again, in fear, because when we are being controlled by another person, would I have spoken up if the right question was asked? I don't know. It would have been interesting to see if some people would have been educated to look at a deeper problem at that time to see what that could have looked like for me.